Laura Callahan stepped out of the mine, her boots heavy with grit and her body aching from the relentless grind of the past 40 hours. The air outside was thick with dust, swirling around her like a storm that refused to settle. Her face was streaked with sweat and dirt, her dark hair plastered to her forehead in uneven clumps. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge across her cheek, but she didn't care. All she wanted was to breathe something other than the stale metallic air of the tunnels. The mine was a labyrinth of jagged walls and dim lights, where the hum of machinery drowned out any sense of peace. It wasn't just physically exhausting, it was soul-crushing. Laura had been working here for 5 years now, ever since she'd signed up as a way to pay off debts she couldn't escape. Every credit she earned went toward buying herself freedom, not just from the mines, but from the life that kept her trapped there. Still, no matter how hard she worked, the debt always seemed to grow faster than she could chip away at it. Carl, the foreman, stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand. He glanced up as she approached, his expression somewhere between concern and annoyance. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Callahan," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. 40 hours straight. What are you trying to prove?" Laura shrugged, adjusting the strap of her toolkit slung over her shoulder. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I just need the credits." Carl sighed, shaking his head. "You'll burn yourself out if you keep this up. Even machines need downtime." She forced a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Machines don't have rent to pay. He didn't argue further, knowing better than to push her. Instead, he nodded toward the barracks. "Get some rest. You've earned it." Rest sounded good, more than good, but Laura knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Not tonight. She trudged toward the small cluster of prefabricated buildings that served as living quarters for the miners. The walk felt longer than usual, each step weighing her down more than the last. By the time she reached her tiny room, she was practically dragging her feet. Inside, the space was sparse: a narrow cot, a rickety table, and a single chair. There were no personal touches, nothing to suggest anyone actually lived there. Laura dropped her toolkit onto the floor with a dull thud and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored them. Pain was familiar. Pain was manageable. It was the thoughts racing through her mind that she couldn't shut off. 40 hours underground. 40 hours breathing recycled air and listening to the constant groan of shifting rock. And for what? Credits that barely covered her expenses, let alone brought her closer to freedom. But giving up wasn't an option. She promised herself she wouldn't end up like so many others who came here, young and hopeful, only to grow old and bitter beneath the surface of this desolate planet. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast 2 days ago. Food wasn't appealing, though. Not when every bite tasted like ash. Besides, she still had enough energy left for one thing before calling it a night. Pushing herself upright, Laura grabbed her jacket and headed back outside. If nothing else, she could drown her frustrations in cheap liquor at the cantina. Maybe, just maybe, she'd find someone willing to listen, or at least pretend to. For a little while. The cantina was loud and chaotic, the kind of place where people went to forget their troubles, or at least numb them for a while. Laura pushed open the heavy metal door, stepping inside to find the usual crowd. Miners blowing off steam after long shifts, traders haggling over deals in shadowy corners, and a few drifters who looked like they hadn't left the bar in days. The air smelled of stale beer, sweat, and something faintly metallic that Laura couldn't quite place. She didn't mind it. She barely noticed anymore. She made her way to the bar, weaving through clusters of people shouting over the din. The bartender, a wiry man with a scar running down one cheek, nodded as she approached. "The usual?" he asked, already reaching for a glass. "Yeah," Laura replied, sliding onto a stool. She rested her elbows on the counter, watching as he poured her drink. It wasn't anything fancy, just cheap whiskey, but it would do the job. She took a sip, wincing slightly as the burn hit her throat. Across the room, someone laughed too loudly, and another voice joined in. But Laura tuned them out. She wasn't here for conversation. That's when she noticed him. He was sitting alone at a table near the back, half hidden in the shadows. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood out even in the dim light. His clothes weren't flashy, but they were clean and well-maintained, a stark contrast to the worn-out uniforms most miners wore. He had sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to scan the room without really seeing anyone. Laura caught herself staring and quickly looked away, pretending to focus on her drink. But curiosity got the better of her. She glanced back a moment later, only to find him looking directly at her. Their eyes met briefly, and she felt an odd flicker of unease. There was something about him, something unspoken, unreadable, that set her on edge. She turned away again, telling herself it was nothing, just another stranger passing through. A few minutes passed, and Laura tried to relax, letting the noise around her blur into background static. But then she saw him stand up and start walking toward the bar. Her stomach tightened, though she wasn't sure why. He stopped a few feet away, leaning casually against the counter as if he belonged there. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe mid-30s, with short brown hair and a faint stubble along his jawline. "You're Laura Callahan, right?" he said, his voice calm but firm. She blinked, caught off guard. "Do I know you?" "No," he admitted, offering a small smile. "But I've heard things. You're one of the best miners on this rock." Laura raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "If you're trying to flatter me, you're wasting your time." "I'm not here to flatter anyone," he replied, his tone serious now. "My name's Ethan Brooks. I'm a trader, and I need someone who knows how to handle themselves in tough situations. Someone reliable." Laura frowned, gripping her glass tighter. "What kind of situation are we talking about?" Ethan hesitated, glancing around the crowded room before lowering his voice. "Not here. If you're interested, meet me tomorrow morning at Docking Bay 12. We can talk details then." She studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of deception. He seemed sincere enough, but sincerity didn't mean much in a place like this. Still, there was something about the way he carried himself, confident, but not arrogant, that made her pause. Whatever he was offering, it had to be better than another 40-hour shift in the mines. "Fine," she said finally, setting her glass down. "I'll hear you out, but if this is some kind of scam, you'll regret it." Ethan nodded, clearly satisfied. "Fair enough. Tomorrow morning, then." With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Laura watched him go, her mind racing. What did he want from her? And why did she feel like saying yes might change everything? The next morning, Laura woke up earlier than usual. Her body felt heavy, still sore from the long hours in the mine, but her mind was sharp and restless. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and his vague offer. Who was he, really? And what kind of job could possibly require someone like her? A miner with nothing special to offer except stubbornness and a strong back. Still, the promise of something different, something more, had planted a seed of hope in her chest. Hope was dangerous, but it was also hard to ignore. She dressed quickly, pulling on her worn jacket and tucking the small knife into her pocket out of habit. The docking bays were only a short walk from the barracks, but the air outside was biting cold, carrying the metallic tang of the planet's thin atmosphere. Laura pulled her collar tighter around her neck as she moved through the narrow streets, passing rows of rusted equipment and abandoned crates. By the time she reached Docking Bay 12, the sun, or what passed for a sun here, was just beginning to rise, casting an eerie orange glow over the landscape. Ethan was already there, standing beside a battered cargo ship that looked like it had seen better days. He wore the same calm expression from the night before, though there was a hint of impatience in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. When he saw her approach, he nodded in greeting. "Glad you showed up," he said simply. "Don't get too excited," Laura replied, crossing her arms. I'm not saying yes to anything yet. Fair enough, Ethan said, gesturing toward the ship. Let me show you what we're dealing with. He led her to a sealed container resting near the loading ramp. It was sleek and black, its surface smooth and unmarked, except for a series of faint symbols etched along the edges. The symbols seemed to shimmer faintly, almost like they were alive. Laura frowned, leaning closer. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low. "That," Ethan said, "is why I need someone like you. It's valuable, extremely valuable. And there are people who will do whatever it takes to get their hands on it. My job is to deliver it safely. Your job would be to help me make sure that happens." Laura straightened, her eyes narrowing. "You want me to babysit a box? For what?" "Credits. More credits than you've ever seen," Ethan replied without hesitation. "Enough to buy your way out of the mines forever. Enough to start over somewhere else." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Start over. It was all she'd been dreaming of for years, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel both tantalizing and impossible. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now. "There are plenty of mercenaries or hired guns who could do this better than I can." "You're tougher than you look," Ethan said with a slight smile. "And you don't have anything to lose. That makes you dangerous, and exactly what I need." Laura didn't respond right away. She stared at the container, her thoughts racing. This was madness. Escorting some mysterious cargo across hostile territory sounded like a death wish. But then again, so did staying in the mines, working herself to the bone for scraps while the debt collectors circled like vultures. If Ethan was telling the truth, and if she survived, this could be her ticket to freedom. "What's inside it?" she asked after a long pause. Ethan hesitated, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I'll tell you everything once we're underway," he said. "But not here. Not now. Do you trust me enough to come aboard?" Laura let out a dry laugh. "Trust? I don't even know you." "You don't have to trust me," Ethan countered. "Just trust that I'm offering you a chance most people never get." She stared at him for a moment longer, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. I'm in. But if this goes south, I'm holding you responsible." Ethan smiled, looking almost relieved. "Deal." The Iron Falcon wasn't much to look at. Its hull was patched together with mismatched metal plates, and the engines sputtered noisily as Ethan powered them up. Laura stood near the loading ramp, watching as the battered ship hummed to life. She couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. This thing looked like it might fall apart before they even left the atmosphere. But Ethan seemed confident, moving around the cockpit with practiced ease as he ran through pre-flight checks. "You sure this thing can make it?" Laura asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "It's held together by duct tape and hope," Ethan admitted without looking up. "But it gets the job done." "Comforting," Laura muttered under her breath, though she didn't press further. Instead, she climbed aboard, taking in the cramped interior. The walls were lined with exposed wires and dented panels, and the air smelled faintly of oil and burnt plastic. A narrow corridor led to a small living area, where a table was bolted to the floor and a few chairs floated loosely in zero gravity. Beyond that, she could see a tiny sleeping quarters and what looked like a storage compartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it wasn't the mines either. Ethan joined her a moment later, handing her a headset. "Put this on. It'll keep us connected during the flight." He gestured toward one of the chairs. "Strap in. We're leaving soon." Laura obeyed, settling into the seat and fastening the harness. As the ship lifted off, she felt the familiar pull of acceleration pressing her back. Through the viewport, she watched the mining colony shrink into the distance, its jagged structures blending into the barren landscape. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Possibility. Once they were clear of the planet's gravity, Ethan set the autopilot and turned to face her. "All right," he said, his tone serious now. "Let's talk about the cargo." He pulled up a holographic display, projecting an image of the black container onto the table between them. The symbols etched into its surface glowed faintly, pulsing in a rhythm that made Laura uneasy. "This isn't just any shipment," Ethan continued. "It contains experimental technology, something so advanced it could change everything if used correctly, or destroy everything if it falls into the wrong hands." Laura frowned, leaning forward. "What kind of technology?" "I don't know all the details," Ethan admitted, "but I do know it's tied to quantum energy manipulation. Whoever controls it could rewrite reality itself, or at least parts of it. That's why we're not alone out here. There are others who want it, and they won't stop until they have it." Laura stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. It sounded like something out of a bad Hollywood, too wild to be real. But the look in Ethan's eyes told her he wasn't lying. Whatever was inside that container, it was worth killing for and dying for. "So who's after us?" she asked finally. "The Syndicate," Ethan replied grimly. "They funded the research behind this tech, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it back. Then there are the bounty hunters, scavengers, and pirates who've caught wind of what we're carrying. We'll be lucky if we make it halfway without running into trouble." Laura exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. This was insane. She'd signed on for danger, sure, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. Still, backing out wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not when the alternative meant going back to the mines. "What's the plan, then?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling inside her. "We stay off the main routes, avoid populated areas, and keep moving," Ethan said. "I've mapped out a path that should get us to our destination in one piece, if we're careful." "And where exactly is our destination?" "A neutral trade hub called New Haven," Ethan explained. "Once we're there, I'll hand off the cargo to my contact, and you'll get your share. After that, you're free to go wherever you want." Laura nodded slowly, absorbing the information. It was risky, maybe even suicidal, but she couldn't deny the appeal. If she survived this, she'd never have to step foot in another mine again. That thought alone was enough to keep her going. For now. As the ship drifted silently through the void, Laura glanced at the glowing symbols on the container. Whatever was inside, it had already changed her life. Whether that change would be for better or worse remained to be seen. The journey into the Badlands was anything but smooth. The Iron Falcon shuddered as it entered a region of space littered with debris and swirling electromagnetic storms. Laura gripped the edge of her seat in the cockpit, watching as jagged chunks of rock and twisted metal floated past the viewport. It was like navigating through a graveyard of forgotten ships and satellites, their broken hulls glinting faintly in the dim light of distant stars. Ethan sat at the controls, his hands steady despite the chaos around them. "This is the tricky part," he said, his voice calm but focused. "Stay alert. We're not alone out here." Laura didn't respond. She was too busy scanning the scanners, her eyes darting across the screen for any sign of movement. The Badlands were notorious for hiding dangers. Pirates lying in wait, rogue AI drones patrolling the wreckage, or even natural phenomena that could tear a ship apart in seconds. Every flicker on the radar made her heart skip a beat. Sure enough, it wasn't long before trouble found them. A blip appeared on the scanner, small at first, but growing rapidly. "We've got company," Laura said, pointing to the screen. Her voice was tight, laced with tension. Ethan glanced at the readout, his jaw tightening. "Pirates," he muttered. "They must have been tracking us since we left the colony." Before Laura could ask what they should do, the ship rocked violently as something slammed into their shields. Alarms blared, filling the cockpit with flashing red lights. Ethan cursed under his breath and grabbed the controls, weaving the Iron Falcon through the debris field as more shots rang out. Sparks flew from one of the panels, and the smell of burning wires filled the air. "Get to the turret," Ethan shouted over the noise. "I'll keep us moving." Laura didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled out of her seat and hurried to the rear of the ship, where a mounted laser turret was bolted to the floor. Climbing into the seat, she powered up the weapon and took aim. Through the targeting display, she could see two enemy ships closing in, their hulls scared and patched together like scavengers' chunk heaps. They fired again, their blasts narrowly missing the Iron Falcon as Ethan pulled into a sharp dive. Her hands trembled slightly as she lined up her shot, but years of working machinery in the mines had given her steady fingers. She squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of energy toward the nearest pirate ship. The shot hit its mark, tearing through the vessel's wing and sending it spinning out of control. The second ship veered off, trying to flank them, but Laura adjusted her aim and fired again. This time, the shot grazed the ship's hull, forcing it to retreat behind a chunk of floating debris. "Nice work," Ethan called back, his voice strained. He yanked the controls hard to the left, dodging another volley of fire. The Iron Falcon groaned in protest, its battered frame barely holding together. Laura kept firing, her focus narrowing to the rhythm of the turret and the movements of the enemy ships. One of the pirates managed to clip their engines, causing the ship to shudder violently. Smoke began to fill the cabin, and warning lights blinked furiously on the dashboard. But Laura didn't stop. She fired again and again, until finally the remaining pirate ship broke off, retreating into the shadows of the Badlands. For a moment, there was silence except for the hum of the damaged engines. Laura slumped back in the turret seat, her hands trembling now from adrenaline rather than fear. She climbed down and returned to the cockpit, where Ethan was already assessing the damage. "We're alive," she said, her voice hoarse. "But I don't think this bucket of bolts will hold up much longer." Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined. "It'll have to. We're not safe yet." As the Iron Falcon limped forward, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever waited for them ahead, it wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be safe. The Iron Falcon limped through the Badlands, its damaged systems groaning with every passing second. Smoke lingered in the cabin, and the faint smell of burnt wiring made it hard to breathe. Laura sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her hands still shaking from the fight. She stared out the viewport at the endless expanse of debris and shadow, trying to steady her racing thoughts. They had survived the pirates, for now. But the ship was in bad shape, too bad for comfort. Ethan worked frantically at the controls, running diagnostics and patching up what he could. His face was pale, his jaw clenched as he muttered under his breath. "Engines are holding," he said after a moment, though his voice didn't sound convinced. "But we're leaking fuel. If we don't find somewhere to land soon, we're dead in the water." Laura frowned, leaning forward to study the scanner. The screen flickered weakly, showing nothing but more wreckage and empty space. "Any ideas?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. "There's a moon up ahead," Ethan replied, pointing to a faint dot on the radar. "Uninhabited, but it might have enough resources to let us make repairs. It's our best shot. Better than drifting out here until the syndicate shows up," Laura muttered, gripping the armrests of her seat. The thought of those mysterious pursuers sent a chill down her spine. Pirates were bad enough, but the syndicate, that was a whole other level of trouble. The moon grew larger as they approached, its surface pockmarked with craters and streaked with jagged ridges. It wasn't much to look at, but it offered shelter, and that was all they needed right now. Ethan guided the ship into a rough landing, the impact jolting them both as the Iron Falcon skidded across the rocky terrain. When the dust settled, they climbed out, stepping onto the barren surface. The air was thin and cold, forcing them to pull on oxygen masks before venturing too far. Laura scanned the horizon, her hand resting on the knife tucked into her belt. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's failing systems. "Where do we start?" she asked, turning to Ethan. "With the cargo," he said, nodding toward the black container they had dragged out of the ship. "If anyone comes looking for us, We'll need to know how to use this thing, assuming we can figure it out. Laura hesitated, glancing at the glowing symbols etched into the container's surface. You think it's safe to mess with it? It's not like we have a choice, Ethan replied, crouching beside the device. He pressed his palm against one of the symbols, and the container hummed to life. A holographic map sprang into view, projecting a detailed layout of the surrounding area. It highlighted nearby caves, potential fuel sources, and even hidden routes through the Badlands. Laura stared at the projection, her eyes widening. "This is incredible," she whispered, forgetting for a moment how dangerous the situation was. "Is this what the Syndicate wants? Something that can map the galaxy like this?" "Not just map it," Ethan said, his voice low. "It predicts movement, weaknesses, everything. Whoever has this can stay 10 steps ahead of their enemies, or destroy them without warning." Before Laura could respond, a sharp sound echoed in the distance, a metallic clang, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Both of them froze, exchanging a glance. Someone else was here. "Stay close," Ethan said, grabbing a makeshift weapon from the ground. Laura nodded, pulling her knife free. Together, they moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. As they rounded a ridge, they saw him. Jake, one of the crew members who had been working on the Iron Falcon back at the mining colony. But something was off. His face was pale, his movements jerky, and his eyes darted around like he was being hunted. When he spotted them, he raised his hands in surrender. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he stammered, his voice trembling. "They caught me, threatened my family." Laura's stomach sank. Betrayal wasn't surprising out here, but coming from someone they trusted. That stung. "Who caught you?" she demanded, stepping closer. "The pirates," Jake admitted, lowering his head. "They know where we are, and they're coming." Laura stared at Jake, her grip tightening on the knife in her hand. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What did you tell them?" she asked, her voice cold and steady. Jake swallowed hard, his hand shaking as he tried to explain. They caught me when I went to check the fuel lines before we left. They said they'd kill my sister if I didn't help them track you down. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," Ethan snapped, stepping forward. His tone was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "And yours just put us all in danger." "I'm sorry," Jake cried, his voice cracking. Tears welled up in his eyes, but Laura didn't feel any sympathy. Out here, apologies meant nothing unless you could back them up with action. "I didn't know what else to do. Please, you have to believe me." Laura glanced at Ethan, searching for some kind of guidance. His jaw was clenched, his fists balled at his sides. She could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, but he wasn't acting on it. Not yet. Instead, he turned his attention back to Jake. "How far behind are they?" he demanded. "Not far," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe an hour, maybe less." Ethan cursed under his breath and turned away, pacing quickly as he thought. Laura kept her eyes locked on Jake, watching for any sudden movements. He looked scared, terrified, even, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try something desperate. People did stupid things when they were cornered. "We need to move," Ethan said finally, stopping in his tracks. "Leave the ship. Take only what we can carry. If they catch us here, we're dead." "What about him?" Laura asked, nodding toward Jake. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. She didn't trust him anymore, and neither should Ethan. Ethan hesitated, glancing at Jake with a mixture of disgust and pity. "He stays. He's their problem now." "No," Jake shouted, panic rising in his voice. "You can't leave me here. They'll kill me." "That's not my concern," Ethan replied coldly. "This is your mess, kid. You deal with it." Laura felt a flicker of unease at the harshness in Ethan's words, but she didn't argue. Jake had made his choice, and now he would face the consequences. Still, As they began gathering supplies and preparing to leave, she couldn't shake the image of his terrified face from her mind. The three of them worked in tense silence, packing tools, rations, and weapons into makeshift bags. Jake moved slowly, his hands trembling as he helped, though no one trusted him enough to let him carry anything important. When they were ready, Ethan grabbed the black container, their precious cargo, and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's go," he said, turning toward the rocky hills in the distance. Jake stood frozen, his eyes wide with fear. "Please," he begged one last time, reaching out toward Laura. "Don't leave me." She met his gaze for a moment, seeing the desperation in his eyes. But there was nothing she could do. With a final glance, she turned and followed Ethan, leaving Jake behind in the shadow of the abandoned ship. They hadn't gone far when the sound of engines roared in the distance. Turning back, Laura saw the pirate ships descending on the Iron Falcon like vultures circling their prey. Jake was still standing there, rooted to the spot, as the pirates swarmed around him. A single shot rang out, echoing across the barren landscape. Laura flinched but didn't look back again. There was no time for guilt or regret. Survival came first. The rocky hills offered little cover, but Laura and Ethan moved quickly, their footsteps crunching against the dry, uneven ground. The distant hum of engines grew louder, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Laura adjusted the strap of her bag, shifting its weight as she climbed higher. Her muscles burned from the effort, but she pushed through the pain. Stopping wasn't an option, not with pirates closing in. Ethan led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. "There," he said suddenly, pointing toward a narrow canyon ahead. Its jagged walls rose steeply on either side, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. It wasn't much, but it would give them a chance to hide, and maybe even set a trap. They slipped into the canyon, moving deeper until the sounds of pursuit faded into the background. Laura leaned against the cool stone, catching her breath while Ethan examined the black container. He placed it carefully on the ground and activated the holographic map again. The glowing projection lit up the space around them, revealing hidden paths and choke points marked in faint blue lines. "This might work," Ethan muttered, tracing one of the routes with his finger. "If we can lure them into this section of the canyon, we can collapse the entrance behind us. Cut them off." Laura frowned, studying the map. "And then what? We're still stuck out here." "We'll figure that out later," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "First, we survive." She wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but there was no time. The sound of boots scraping against stone echoed through the canyon, growing closer with each passing second. Someone was coming. Fast. "Get ready," Ethan whispered, pulling a small device from his pocket. It looked like a detonator, its red button glowing faintly in the dim light. He pressed it into Laura's hand. "When I say so, press this. It'll bring the whole thing down." Laura nodded, though her heart was pounding. She didn't trust herself with something so important, but she couldn't afford to hesitate now. Together, they moved further into the canyon, positioning themselves behind a cluster of boulders where they could see without being seen. Moments later, the pirates appeared, 3 of them, armed and alert. They moved cautiously, their weapons drawn as they scanned the area. One of them spotted the container lying open on the ground and gestured for the others to follow. Laura held her breath, her finger hovering over the button. She could hear Ethan's voice in her head. "Wait for my signal, asterisk." The pirates reached the container, their attention focused entirely on the glowing map. That's when Ethan struck. He threw a small explosive charge toward the canyon walls, shouting, "Now." Laura pressed the button without thinking, her hands trembling. A deafening roar filled the air as the walls collapsed, sending tons of rock crashing down onto the pirates. Dust clouded the canyon, choking the air and obscuring everything. Laura coughed, covering her face as she stumbled back toward Ethan. When the dust settled, all that remained of the pirates was silence. The entrance to the canyon was completely blocked, sealing them inside, but also keeping anyone else out. For now, at least, they were safe. Ethan let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. That should buy us some time. Laura stared at the rubble, her mind racing. What if more of them come? What if they dig through? They won't, Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. Not right away. And by then, we'll have figured out our next move. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. This was far from over. Still, they had survived this long. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it through whatever came next. The silence in the canyon was heavy, broken only by the occasional trickle of dust sliding down the collapsed walls. Laura leaned against a boulder, her legs trembling from exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried her through the fight was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. She glanced at Ethan, who was crouched beside the black container, examining the holographic map once more. His face was pale, his hand steady but tense as he traced the glowing lines with his fingers. "We're trapped," Laura said finally, her voice low and flat. "Even if no one comes after us, we're stuck here." Ethan didn't look up. "Not necessarily. There's another way out, through those tunnels." He pointed to a narrow opening in the canyon wall, barely visible in the dim light. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." Laura frowned, staring at the jagged hole. It looked unstable, like it might collapse at any moment. "You sure about this? That thing looks like it could bury us alive." "I'm not sure about anything," Ethan admitted, standing up. "But staying here isn't an option. If more pirates show up, and they will, they'll find a way through the rubble. We need to keep moving." Laura hesitated, weighing their choices. None of them were good. Staying put meant waiting for death. Moving forward meant risking it outright. Still, she nodded slowly. "All right, let's go." They gathered what little supplies they had left and approached the tunnel entrance. The air inside was cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of earth and something metallic. Laura pulled her knife from her belt, holding it tightly as they stepped into the darkness. Ethan led the way, using a small flashlight to illuminate the path ahead. The beam bounced off the rough stone walls, casting strange shadows that danced around them. The tunnel twisted and turned, narrowing in places until they had to squeeze through sideways. Laura's heart raced with every step, her mind imagining the ceiling collapsing or the ground giving way beneath them. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that stopping wasn't an option. After what felt like hours, they reached a wider chamber. The ceiling arched high above them, and the faint glow of bioluminescent fungi lined the walls, casting an eerie green light. In the center of the room stood a massive metal door, its surface rusted but still intact. Strange symbols etched into the metal matched the ones on the black container. "What is this place?" Laura whispered, her voice echoing softly in the cavern. Ethan didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the door, running his hand over the symbols. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think it's connected to the cargo." Laura's stomach tightened. "You think whatever's inside that container can open it?" "Maybe," Ethan replied, pulling the container closer. He placed it on the ground and activated the holographic map again. This time, the projection shifted, aligning itself with the symbols on the door. A low hum filled the chamber as the door began to shift, groaning loudly as it slid open. Beyond it lay a long corridor, lit by flickering lights embedded in the walls. The air smelled cleaner here, almost artificial. Laura exchanged a wary glance with Ethan. "This doesn't feel right," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's not supposed to," Ethan replied, gripping his weapon tighter. "But we don't have a choice." They moved cautiously into the corridor, their footsteps echoing softly. The walls were smooth and metallic, unlike the rough stone of the tunnels. Every so often, they passed sealed doors marked with more symbols. Whatever this place was, it had been built by someone, or something, with advanced technology. As they reached the end of the corridor, they found themselves in a large control room. Panels lined the walls, covered in blinking lights and unfamiliar controls. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, its surface glowing faintly. Ethan approached it, setting the container down. The device hummed louder, syncing with the pedestal as streams of data flowed across the screens. "What are you doing?" Laura asked, her voice sharp with unease. "Figuring out where we are," Ethan replied, his eyes locked on the displays. "And how to get out." Before Laura could respond, the room trembled slightly, and a deep mechanical voice echoed around them. "Access granted. Primary systems initializing." Her breath caught in her throat. "What did you just do?" Ethan shook his head, his expression grim. "I think we just woke something up." The control room came alive with a surge of energy, lights flickering brighter and panels humming with activity. Laura took a step back, her hand instinctively gripping the knife at her side. The mechanical voice echoed again, deeper this time. "Welcome, travelers. System reboot sequence initiated." "What did you do?" Laura repeated, her voice rising with panic. "I didn't know this would happen," Ethan replied, his tone tense as he scanned the screens. His hands hovered over the controls, unsure whether to intervene or leave it alone. "This place, it's some kind of ancient facility. The cargo must have been designed to interface with it." Laura shook her head, her mind racing. "We don't belong here. Whatever this is, we need to get out before it's too late." But before they could move, the pedestal emitted a sharp pulse of light, projecting a hologram into the air. It was a map, larger and more detailed than anything they'd seen before. Entire star systems were marked, along with glowing paths that seemed to shift and change as they watched. This changes everything," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with awe. He reached out toward the hologram, but Laura grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Snap out of it," she snapped. "This isn't about discovery anymore. We're running out of time. If the Syndicate finds us..." Her words were cut off by a sudden rumble from deep within the facility. The walls vibrated, and dust fell from the ceiling. Alarms began to blare, filling the room with piercing noise. The mechanical voice returned, colder now. "Unauthorized access detected. Security protocols engage." Ethan cursed under his breath, grabbing the black container. "We need to go. Now." They ran back through the corridor, retracing their steps as the facility seemed to come alive around them. Panels sparked, doors slammed shut on their own, and the faint sound of machinery echoed in the distance. Whatever they had awakened, it wasn't happy. Reaching the tunnel entrance, they scrambled through just as the metal door behind them sealed itself with a deafening clang. The cavern was dimly lit once more, the bioluminescent fungi casting an eerie glow. Laura paused for a moment, catching her breath. "What now?" Ethan glanced at the container in his hands, then at Laura. "Now we use this to get out of here." That map, it showed escape routes, safe zones. "We can make it if we move fast." Laura nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She trusted Ethan, but trust only went so far when survival was on the line. Together, they climbed out of the canyon, emerging into the cold, open expanse of the moon's surface. In the distance, they spotted a small scout ship, one of the pirates' vessels, abandoned during their earlier attack. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. They sprinted toward it, dodging rocks and debris as the ground beneath them trembled again. Inside the ship, Ethan worked quickly to power up the engines while Laura kept watch. Within minutes, they were airborne, leaving the mysterious facility and the Syndicate behind. As they broke free of the moon's gravity, Laura leaned back in her seat, exhaustion washing over her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. They weren't safe yet, but they were closer than ever to freedom. "You did good back there," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "I couldn't have done it without you." Laura managed a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a long way to go." He nodded, his expression softening. "Where will you go?" "Once we reach New Haven." She thought for a moment, staring out at the endless stars. "Somewhere new. Somewhere I can start over. Ethan smiled faintly. You've earned it. And for the first time in years, Laura believed him.